A gente sabe que educação se dá na presença. E de uma hora para outra, esse lugar tão especial do aprendizado teve que mudar. Em tempos de mudança, é muito importante lembrar que estamos juntos. a empatia e a colaboração são ainda mais importantes para a gente seguir construindo futuros mais brilhantes. É sobre isso o Cambridge Day 2020. Colaboração em tempos de mudança. Nosso evento sempre foi um momento de encontro, celebração e aprendizados. Esse ano seguiremos juntos, ao vivo, com palestrantes do mundo todo, cada um na sua própria casa. Então nós temos um encontro marcado dos dias 20 a 24 de julho. Inscreva-se em cambridgeday.org.br. Vem com a gente construir mais um Cambridge Day.
Oops, I was muted. Hi, everyone. Nice to have you here at the last of the 5 days of Cambridge Day 2020 that this year connects Latin American countries such as Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Uruguay, Colombia, as well as other countries from all over the world. I saw people from Portugal on our chat. Where are you now? From where you're joining us? Please tell us on our chat. My name is Renata Simões. Some of you, the ones who were attending the previous days, already know me. I'm your host for the Cambridge Day 2020. How are you today? Excited to come to the end or already feeling nostalgic about it? I'm a little bit nostalgic, I have to say, you guys. Before we start, a few messages. An important message for the ones who ordered Cambridge University Press books through our partners during the Cambridge Day 2020. We'd like to inform you that they will arrive in a couple weeks. So please be patient and keep up with us. Also, before we move on, Cambridge University Press would like to thank you for being with us during this journey, and also to thank the ones who could make this event happen. So it's time for a big up, my big up and our big up on all the speakers from all over the world who could share all their knowledge with us, with you and with us during this week. Our partners who always trust on Cambridge University Press projects. A big up for Camélia Digital, who manages and creates amazing content on our digital channels. A big up for Bella Baderna, who creates stunning audiovisual content, streaming the whole event. Cambridge University Press Argentina, Cambridge University Press Chile, and colleagues from Cambridge University Press Brazil who are involved in organizing this event. Thank you very much. I thank the people who are in the chat also helping you and helping me to keep this event moving, because you are so amazing on the chat and they are helping you and helping me. Now we will begin our day with a well-known speaker. I saw a few of you actually already a little bit excited about his presence. He has been to all the Cambridge Day editions. He's a frequent visitor to Brazil, writer, teacher, trainer, and conference speaker. And he already revealed to me that he speaks a little bit of Portuguese. For Cambridge University Press, he has published 2 methodology handbooks for teachers, language learning with digital video and working with images. For students, he has co-authored Evolve, a new adult course book series for adults, and Eyes Open Uncover for teenagers. Please welcome Ben Goldstein.
Thank you very much,
Hi,
Renata.
Ben.
Hi.
How are you?
Muito
Good.
obrigado.
Quarantine in Spain. That's what I heard from you. You're in Spain right now.
Yeah, that's right, in Catalonia, in the northeast of Spain.
Yeah. And how are things there? What time is it? Because I know we have like a very big, how can I say, hour challenge. I think is what, 6 p.m. there?
Yeah, it's 7, 5 hours difference. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
It's nice weather.
Thank you very much for joining us here. And please start your webinar, because our crowd is very excited to have you here. Thank you very much again.
Un prazer. Thank you, Renata. And welcome everybody to this final day of the Cambridge Day events in Brazil. You've had some great speakers. I hope you enjoyed this final day and this first talk of mine this afternoon. I'm going to be talking, it's called The Great Reset, my webinar, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about what some other speakers have mentioned, I know, because I've seen a couple of their talks in the last couple of days, really talking about what has been happening on the last few months? What have we learned, and where are we headed? Perhaps some predictions for the future. What happens after lockdown, and how will we transition back to the physical classroom? So this is what we'll be looking at more or less over the next 45 minutes, 50 minutes, and then I have happy to take any questions from you, of course. So we'll be looking at the impact that the pandemic has had. We'll be looking at the very important topic of teacher and student well-being. This is something which I know is a very much a hot topic and has been mentioned by many speakers. And certainly I got interested in this whole issue. I'll explain in a moment, when I did a ask me anything question session with other authors for the Cambridge University Press a couple of months ago, and I shared that. I'll show you the screenshot of the Ask Me Anything live panel that we did about a couple of months ago with Sarah Mercer, myself, Anne Robinson, and Matt Ellman. And that's where I became very interested in this whole topic of what happens, what is the impact of the pandemic going to be, and this whole issue of teacher and student well-being. And Sarah is very much an expert on that. So we'll be looking at that in a second. We'll also be looking at teacher testimonies. To prepare for this talk, I've interviewed a number of different teachers in different contexts, a lot in Brazil, and we'll be looking at their testimonies, including Raquel Ribeiro's. I don't know if you saw her webinar just a couple of days ago. I'll be referring to that. Raquel, if you're watching. Then we'll be looking at the whole issue of the pandemic as a pretext for change. We'll be talking a lot about the new normal, whether that is something we should be referring to or not, and what is the effect of these kinds of expressions, the new normal, the great reset, and so on. How should we respond to that kind of language? And then a few conclusions. So let's look then at the impact of the pandemic. Let's get going. And as I said, this really, I got interested in this after doing the Ask Me Anything session with my companions. So I'm going to ask you a question first of all. One of the topics that came up in that session was how we should refer to the kind of teaching that we have been doing, the kind of learning that's been taking place over the last few months. So how have we been teaching? Could you just in the comment box, could you write in the chat box, what would you call the type of teaching you have been doing in the last few months? Let me see, I can see 120 comments, my God. What kind of, how would you describe this teaching, this kind of teaching? Okay, so already interesting, we've got via Zoom, somebody has said, online, emergency, remote, that's interesting, Tamara. Emergency teaching, the best I can do, online teaching, good. We don't quite know how to refer to it, but I'll explain, as it's a relatively new thing, what we've been doing. I'll explain the two terms that a couple of you have already mentioned. These are remote and online, and perhaps try to explain what the difference is between these two different adjectives. And I think a couple of you already identified that because one of you said emergency remote. And in fact, that is I think that the best way to refer to what we've been doing, and quite possibly other speakers have mentioned this already over the last week, is to refer to it as remote teaching, because this is not something that is planned. This is something which has been organized, has been improvised in very much an emergency context, whereas online is teaching that is designed to be delivered in that way. And I teach on an MA online. It's 100% online. The whole course is designed to be delivered online. And that is very, very different. And it's asynchronous, for example. That's very different to the kind of teaching that I know you are doing, a lot of you are doing. The other thing that I think differentiates remote from online is that remote teaching and learning is not all online. Some of it is online, and other skills and other tasks are actually offline. And for example, reading is quite difficult to, compared to reading from a textbook, it's quite difficult to read on screen. So a lot of teachers I've spoken to have been supplementing their reading with reading on paper-bound textbooks and asking students to use pen and paper to take notes. Project work very often takes place outside the classroom, offline as well, whereas online teaching is 100% delivered online. So I think that's another difference between the remote and the online. The other thing I think about remote is that the word remote actually suggests geographical distance and improvisation, I think. It even has a slightly negative connotation, I think, the idea of you are remote from someone, you're distant from them. Whereas online suggests a more fixed way of working. And of course, now remote in the context of COVID really does imply the adaptation of face-to-face classes. That's what we have been doing. That's what we've had to do because we had no choice. And clearly that is not what online teaching and learning is about. Online learning and teaching implies an established mode of delivery. It's similar to distance, which is another adjective that is often used to describe that kind of teaching. And interestingly, during the Ask Me Anything session a couple of months ago, again, one of the things that I did, a bit of research I did to prepare for that, was actually look at the difference between the frequency of use of the word online and the frequency of use of the adjective remote, the two adjectives. And interestingly, this is taken from Julie Moore's. I got you the link there from the Lexico blog spot. She has an excellent, she's a lexicographer. She has an excellent blog where she looks at new coinages and new terms that are emerging. And of course, at the moment with COVID, she's working very hard at collating all of this information. In her Lexico blog, she uses a web corpus to trace the frequency of use of these different terms. And in fact, remote, she said, this is from April, just a couple of months ago, and she said that the remote was not even referred to a few months ago. So it really is, I think, the way to describe what we are doing. And in terms of learning, remote has a much higher frequency, as does distance, than teaching. But I think this is very revealing that she takes this corpus of data collected from a range of online sources, and it shows exactly that the word remote is quite possibly the best way we have to describe what's been going on. So again, I'm going to ask you to make some comments now in the chat box. Let's think positive to start with. Let's think positively, because obviously lots of good things have come out of this, but also quite a few bad things. But let's think from, accentuate the positive. What changes have you made that you might wish to keep after COVID? So hopefully this will all end sometime soon. Lockdown will finish. What benefits have come out of this for you? Could you just, in the chat box, just write a couple of notes? Okay, so I have a little bit of a delay, I think. Okay, some people, I had to learn a lot about the internet, says João Francisco. Autonomy, Flavia. More use of technology. So for games, quizzes, lots of comments coming in now. Sergio, is interesting, the value of face-to-face teaching. Yeah, well, I think that will come perhaps later then, as in a sense that we've learned that face-to-face is, possibly preferable in many contexts. We'll come on to that a bit later. Digital tools which turned out to be useful, discovery of new platforms, greater flexibility, great ideas, that's fantastic. Students more involved, students' challenges in communication. Okay, I don't know if you're referring there to connectivity or the challenge in communicating in different remote classrooms like Zoom and so on. Time management. These are really good because this is a lot of the things that I'll be mentioning now. When I did the Ask Me Anything session, to prepare for that, Matt Ellman from Cambridge University Press, he sent us a link from one of the editors of the Times Educational Supplement, and you can have a look here, she tweeted a question for teachers. The question was, what changes have you made during lockdown that you pledged to keep once schools fully reopen? So that was the question. And then she received, lots of tweets from, and these are teachers in the UK. Later we'll be looking at teachers in Brazil and other countries, but these are interesting comments because these are coming from state school sector. And here are a couple of those comments. So here is, there were literally hundreds of comments, hundreds of answers, tweets to that question of what you will retain, what positive things will you retain. And what's interesting is that some of the teachers referred to well-being, their personal well-being, and others referred. So some people understood the question to be referring more to their well-being and their mental state, and others to their, exactly what they were doing in their lessons. So look at this teacher's response: for personal well-being, exercise more and take time to read and learn new things myself. And then she says, in terms of school, be more experimental in teaching delivery, which is interesting. The whole mode of delivery has been new for us. And she's saying that she's experimenting more. Give everyone regular brain breaks. Again, the idea of when you're looking at on the screen that you have, you get saturated, so you need to move away from the screen, do something else, especially with young learners. Something physical, some kind of physical activity. Keep open communication with parents. So here you can see she's obviously teaching kids. And remember, praise-focused feedback still has impact. So much there, just in that one tweet. She's referring to so many different things, isn't she? But these are the things that she would like to retain once lockdown, once she can go back to face-to-face classes. And here is another, John, so here's another response. Again, a slightly more broader picture, an awareness of a broader picture, because here he's talking about more blended learning, ensuring more tech for more disadvantaged pupils. So there he's already highlighting a very key issue, isn't he, which is the whole issue of, the problem of connectivity for many students, and how the COVID has really extended the digital divide. It's actually become an educational divide because of the lack of connectivity for many students. And so I think these are two very interesting responses, focusing on mental health, well-being, focusing on tasks and new skills, feedback, relationship with parents, and another teacher taking a completely different tack and really looking at the broader picture and seeing how, yes, more tech, but what about those disadvantaged pupils who don't have the advantage of having that a good online connection? So this is my summary of these positive points, and these 8 points that I'm going to refer to here also come from feedback from other teachers who I've spoken to over the last few weeks. So I would sum it up like this: that teachers, I think you have developed a new repertoire of skills, a new toolkit, and very, very fast. Yeah. If somebody had said to you, you're going to learn all these different skills, in this amount of time, you would have thought that would have been impossible. But because it's been an immersion situation, we've had no choice but to develop. But this new repertoire of skills can be very valuable, and will be a very great shame to lose those skills once we do go back to the face-to-face classroom. Greater creativity and risk-taking in teaching practice. This has been something that has, again, I referred to Raquel Ribeiro's talk the other day. She spoke about that creativity and empathy being one of the things that has been an essential skill to develop since lockdown and in remote teaching contexts. More awareness of time. Again, this was something that one of you mentioned in the chat box just now, time management. There's a greater awareness of time, both in and outside class. I think this is very, very interesting. We, in the face-to-face classroom, we do give so many tasks, pair work tasks, small group tasks, warmers, and simply in remote classrooms, you can't do that. And I think it makes you aware of how long a task can take in a remote classroom. I think we probably cover less in remote classrooms than we would do in the face-to-face classroom. And I think this is probably because of the time it takes to organize the classroom management to get students interacting in breakout rooms and so on. And this has been very, very clear that some teachers have forged stronger connections with their students. Some, I should say, not all. Other positives, greater sense of community and collaboration among teachers. This is something which I've seen again in a number of different other talks and feedback. This has been a very recurring idea that, you know, we're all in this together in a way, sort of this really situation of great adversity. This encourages empathy, encourages a sense of community among teachers, possibly teachers who have never had to work before so closely now collaborating. And that also is obviously an increased flexibility both in and out of class. And I think, again, one of the conclusions I would draw is that students are doing more independent work, and some thrive in that. Some thrive in that remote class environment where they do have more responsibility, more autonomy, and are given more independence. And I think possibly the most successful remote classes are the ones in which the teacher is able to kind of feels able, at least, to give that autonomy to the learners. And a greater awareness of teacher well-being and resilience, which is something which I focused on before. But what about the negatives? Obviously, there have been some, and we can't ignore them. And interestingly, although these are the same tweets in response to the question about what will you retain after you go back to the face-to-face classroom, even though that was asking for positive feedback and positive comments, some of the teachers responded with rather negative comments. Here is a teacher. She says, "I found myself not having proper breaks. I'm sitting on a laptop all day until late at night, something I need not do and sort out quickly." So, you know, she's clearly talking about, you know, suggesting the whole idea there of, you know, of teacher burnout and just not taking enough breaks. And again, another teacher responding rather in a more negative way. "I really want to know what works in terms of online learning." So this is a kind of, I think, something I've noticed in some teachers, this idea that, you know, surely it can't be as good, and surely learners aren't learning as much. You know, a kind of reluctance to embrace the remote learning context. So in terms of negatives, I would suggest that's a clear one. As I said before, the digital divide has become an educational divide, and I think that's true in many, many countries. Students often need to be autonomous in order for remote classes to work, and some students will be happy to do that, but others won't be, and will expect the teacher to control the class more. And again, in some cases, we've seen, yes, the classes are great, they were going really well, but, you know, the attendance is poor in many cases, and sometimes many students don't attend. And some students simply respond poorly in a remote environment. For every student who is quiet in a face-to-face environment and comes alive in a remote environment when they're given perhaps more autonomy and freedom from speaking face-to-face, I think it can go the other way. And we all know other students who perhaps are more reluctant to contribute in the remote environment. And of course, we've all had to learn to be more flexible. Flexibility is expected of us now. But of course, this can be exploitative and upset life-work balance, as the teacher we saw just now commented. It is harder to make connections when students are not visible. And this has resulted, many teachers I've spoken to who observed remote classes, one thing they comment on is more teacher talking time. And I think that possibly is a result of when teachers feel less able to give autonomy to their learners. This doesn't happen all the time by any means, but it can happen if the teacher cannot connect with the learners, especially if they can't be seen. And for some teachers, again, this is absolutely subjective. Feedback and empathy is more difficult to achieve in an online remote context. And I think one very important issue that maybe hasn't been discussed enough is that some students actually feel that remote model devalues their course. So this perhaps maybe in higher education, tertiary sector, teacher training, where students may feel that the remote context is actually contributing to devalue their course, that their course doesn't have as much value as it would do if it was face-to-face. So that's just a few positive and negative the conclusions I've reached to about positive and negative implications of what's been going on. Let's focus on teacher and student well-being now. And I think, again, these are responses to the Ask Me Anything session. And look at this comment from Jessica. She wrote in Facebook after the roundtable. She wrote, "For many of my adult learners, the classes has been a form of human contact outside the immediate family. The socio-affective aspect has become hugely important." And I think this is really, really true, that, you know, in adversity, you know, the role of the class and it has, you know, that social contact, that relationship has been incredibly important when people are confined. And this is something which is really has emerged again and again. And Mark here says, would be good to spend 2 weeks when students do finally go back to school, discussing and evaluating this whole period together before any subject teaching starts. I think that's really, really true. So there's so much going on. You're not just, you know, engaged in remote teaching of English. You know, the whole relationship between your students and what you've developed during this terribly traumatic period. In a way, we need to, when we do hopefully go back to that classroom, it would be wonderful to be able to reflect on the whole experience before any content teaching or subject teaching starts up again. But I think this is very, very important, this whole issue. And this is Sarah Mercer, who I mentioned before. She was talking about the whole problem that everyone's been working at home. Sometimes conditions are very poor, the internet connection is poor, and so on. And this, in a way, you know, the boundaries between work and home life have merged too much for many people. So this remote option, for it to work, it has to be of benefit to teachers and learners, both professionally and emotionally, and not at that expense. And all of us know about post-traumatic stress disorder, and she speaks about that a lot, Sarah. But she did, in a positive way, speak about post-traumatic growth as well. And I think that is possible when you feel able to discuss your emotions more with your students. And this is something which does seem to be emerging in many remote classrooms. And just as a little parenthesis to catch my breath, you might be interested now to see a little clip of a video that Cambridge have produced, Cambridge, Brazil, have produced, Cambridge in Casa, Iniciativas Inovadoras. And I really, really like this video from Paulo, which was made for Cambridge University Press. And he is he's talking here something totally related to this issue of teaching remotely, but also helping, in particular, the LGBTQ community through lockdown, promoting awareness of mental health issues. So just take a look at this video. And I think this is a really good example of a wonderful initiative that has emerged because of the lockdown situation. Could you play the video now then, please?
Eu também sou fundador e coordenador de um projeto chamado English to Transform, que é um projeto que oferece aulas de inglês para pessoas LGBTQIA+, em situação de vulnerabilidade social. Since the quarantine started, we came up with a YouTube channel, and here you will find the videos created by our gorgeous teachers. Also, promoting awareness on your mental health. First, they learn how to talk about how they're feeling. They learn vocabulary for that.
Vamos praticar? Pega uma folhinha, um papel e completa com os sentimentos. In the morning, I usually feel...
And they are encouraged to share in their WhatsApp group a little bit of that. Eu tenho conversado muito com os meus alunos sobre a importância de estar bem mentalmente, e eu acho que essa troca de experiências é fundamental. E eu descobri, sim, que eu sou muito mais forte do que eu pensava.
Okay, well, I think that's a really great example of a great initiative. And something, as I said, focusing on student and teacher well-being throughout this very traumatic period. It's a great example, I think, and wonderful that Cambridge University Press are promoting that on their YouTube channel. Really lovely to see that. just to move on, just before we finish this section on teacher well-being, teacher and student well-being, another interesting blog that you might like to look at is the British Educational Research Association blog. And they have short blog. What's nice about them, they're very short, accessible blog posts, and a lot focusing on COVID and educational research associated with it. And here are two teachers in Australia, University of Sydney, talking about reflections on student well-being and online learning during the pandemic. And I think this focus on the whole student is nothing new, but it's something which is, like many aspects of our profession, is really coming to the fore at the moment, coming into sharp focus now. And in this blog post talking about renegotiating teacher identities and reflecting on student well-being, the two researchers come to these three conclusions: that in remote teaching contexts, we may require greater flexibility in assuming roles of nurturers and carers rather than just deliverers of content. And I think this is something, again, this came up in Raquel's talk and a number of other talks, this idea of, you're not just, going through the motions, teaching your classes, that, the relationship you have with your learners is in particularly important at this time. And this greater flexibility is very important, that the teacher assumes that role rather than just, is the deliverer of content. And increased attention and care in becoming more streamlined and effective communicators. Again, this is something that we learn in these new classrooms, whether it's, Zoom or Google or whatever you're using, that, the attention and care to becoming more effective, to delivering instructions online, becoming more streamlined is very important. And finally, the greater awareness of the individual student and their needs, particularly their access to technology and support network. I saw some comments just then saying that, particularly in Brazil, many or the majority, I think it's actually just that it's 33%. I read, in fact, that 58% of households in Brazil do not have access to a computer. 33% do not have an internet connection. That's what the latest figures, I don't know if those are reliable figures, but these came from a talk that I saw organized by the British Council that I'll share with you in a moment from one of the Brazilian speakers there. So clearly, we need to be aware of each individual student's needs. There may be a computer in the house, but of course it may not be accessible to, there may be a number of different people wanting to use it at the same time. The internet connection may be extremely unreliable and so on. And I have mentioned now, so we're moving on to the third part, the teacher testimonies, Brazil and beyond. I've mentioned a couple of times Raquel's talk, the teacher's journey through the pandemic, which I enjoyed very, very much. And I thought this was a lovely, if you didn't catch it, I'm sure you'll be able to next week when Cambridge upload all of the talks to their YouTube channel. But this was a particularly revealing personal journey through the pandemic, and she referred to three lovely, interesting case studies. She talked about different situations where teachers were overcoming difficulties with empathy and creativity. So she spoke about this teacher who placed the homework in bags on the railings of the school so that the students had something to study. There was the case of classes that were given via radio transmission I think that was in Maranhão, São Luís, and then this lovely one here of if you can see that, I don't know if you'll be able to read that tweet, but it's a little bit blurred, but it's an example of a teacher who was really struggling with technology and getting setting up the class one day, and this I think was in Recife, and the student was really supporting the teacher here, giving them encouragement in a difficult moment. So these are really, really, really interesting case studies of how teachers are overcoming difficulties and are able to rely on the support of their learners in many cases. If you want a slightly broader picture, a more broader picture response, this is a British Council event that took place a couple of weeks ago with many different countries contributing, focusing on remote learning and teacher resilience. Some people ask me, what is teacher resilience? I suppose it's something like the ability to bounce back, after a traumatic moment. And Natasha Costa from the Cidade Escola Aprendiz in Brazil, she was the contributor from Brazil, and she gave a very interesting talk about the work they've been doing in the state segment, obviously, the Education Development Plan. And that's where I got the figures about the 58% of households in Brazil with no access to a computer and 33% without internet. So that's good for a broader picture. And if you're interested in watching that, this was there were some registrations. There were 5,000 people attended that roundtable that organized by the British Council, focusing on the remote learning and teacher resilience. And it was very interesting. They did a questionnaire beforehand to ask them what was the current state of their school. Is it closed? Is it open? Is it only open for key workers? Then they focused on the whole, the question of, the resilience. And there's some interesting responses. So 96 countries, teachers, 5,000 responses from 96 different countries. That gives you a really broad picture of the kind of remote teaching that has been going on. Look at this one there. 87% of those teachers said that they had tried new strategies to work on their resilience in this difficult time. Okay, just other case studies, other comments. You may know Lucy Crichton, a well-known author, and she also has her own language school in Florianopolis, the Secret Garden English School. And I asked her, I've known her for years, I asked her, what it was like teaching remotely with young learners. And she came back with this very positive statement. I'll just give you a couple of minutes to read it. Have a glass of water. And I've highlighted that point there, that she's become more flexible, more open-minded about technology. I mean, she's a similar age to me. We don't find these things necessarily that easy, but it has empowered her. She feels more confident. But what I found really revealing about her statement was, I was happy to see that quite a lot of the things that we've been teaching in my school for the last 18 years are pertinent. I thought that was very interesting, because there is this whole issue often that, people thinking what you're doing remotely is totally different to what you've been doing before. No, I don't believe that's true. The mode of delivery is different, but good teaching practice is good teaching practice. And it's what's interesting that Lucy here's what she's saying is that she realizes that although the mode of delivery is different, that the whole thing is different, the classroom management is different. Pair work doesn't work, for example. The whole basis of so many communicative approach materials simply doesn't work in remote, certainly doesn't work as well in remote contexts. Doesn't matter. The essence of good, English teaching pedagogy is the same regardless of the mode of delivery. And I like the fact she says that the practical living side of the language is what students love most. And it's exactly that prepares them for challenging times. So again, focusing on the real life language that is obviously so important at the moment to describe how you're feeling, etc. Luis Otavio Barros, again, someone you might know, again, a colleague I've known for many years, in a remote lesson observation, he says this, and I thought, again, was very, very revealing. Here we're talking with adult learners, so it wasn't young learners Luis is talking about here. I think overall, most students learned as much or nearly as much as they would have done from a face-to-face lesson. And teachers' strengths and weaknesses were the ones I think I would have pointed out if they taught a face-to-face lesson. So again, I found this, again, very reassuring. In other words, you do not have to change essentially how you teach. The mode of delivery, as I've said before, is different. Clearly, the context is different. But the strengths and weaknesses come through in the same way when you're doing an assessment, as Luis was doing here. And I think this is, reassuring. And Kerry Jones, my co-author, I asked her for feedback, because what she does is she actually observes trainees, so it's at a diploma level, very high level. And what I found interesting about her testimony here is that she was talking about two different teachers teaching the same students remotely. and she was assessing them she was doing a lesson observation. And what I think we need to pick out here is that the attitude to the tech was a real key to success. One of the teachers was resentful of having to be assessed online and was blaming their tools. And so the class was very teacher-centered. And the second was more relaxed, related better to the students, more positive feedback and so on. But they were the same students. In other words, I think clearly then, although good teaching practice is similar in remote context and face-to-face context, the attitude to the tech, it can be important and can be the difference between a successful class and a less successful class. So very interesting, I think, very interesting testimonies from Brazil and from beyond as well. So to finish, in the last 10 minutes, I just really want to focus on, a kind of really broader picture, because the pandemic has been seen as a pretext for change, and I think we need to be careful of that. We are in an emergency situation, as I've said, but I don't think we necessarily need to think there's going to be a revolution overnight to our teaching methodology. This is hopefully a temporary situation. But let's have a look at the language we use to describe the pandemic. So from the World Economic Forum, and a strange place to find this kind of criticism, but interestingly, Chime Asonye from the World Economic Forum blog says that the language of new normal is being deployed almost as a way to quell any uncertainty ushered in by the coronavirus. The language we employ matters. And he goes on to say, it helps to shape and reinforce our understanding of the world. You hear the new normal again and again. Discussion of the new normal seems to help to bring order to our current turbulent situation, but it should not be the lens through which we examine today's crisis. In other words, we shouldn't be referring, these terms shouldn't be how we look, the perspective through which we look at what's going on. I think the same is true of the Great Reset, which is the other name of this talk, and which is the other great term that the World Economic Forum uses to describe what the great changes that are going to take place as a result of the pandemic. Carla Arena, again, who some of you may know, co-founder of NAUTA, she used to work at the Casa Thomas Jefferson before. When I asked her, she knows an awful lot about this, and when I asked her opinion, she said, it is not about a new normal, it is about the next normal and how we are malleable enough to navigate in this fluidity without burnout. We need new strategies and repertoires to be okay with what's coming. So again, thinking that, a change is going to take place, and we're going to need new strategies and repertoires. But does that mean a revolutionary change? I am skeptical about that, and I think we should resist that kind of talk as if overnight we're going to just have to change everything, then reset everything. Very often, people using these terms, the new normal, the Great Reset, are using them as phrases, as kind of selling the idea that we need to get used to a new configuration of the world. And that's one in which technology plays a greater part. And that, as I said, this is the World Economic Forum, the Great Reset. And I think this is perhaps is slightly counterproductive. What they're saying here, you'll see an article here, the COVID-19 pandemic has changed education forever. Well, I think that kind of talk is not beneficial to our community. And I think that sends, is meant to sort of send shockwaves through us. And I think that we need to kind of resist that kind of language because I said, as I think here, they have economic interests at heart, and the tech giants' interests at heart are very. It's very clear that tech education was being increasingly run by education technology giants, and these are now having a greater role suddenly because of the pandemic. And I think we do need to resist that as much as we can. And the critique then, the backlash against the edtech industry, if you want to read about it, the best place to go to is Ben Williamson, whose blog is a fantastic critique of the edtech industry, how the edtech industry is trying to take over what we do. The blog is called Code Acts in Education. And he says here, the current pandemic is being used as an experimental opportunity for EdTech to demonstrate its benefits, not just in an emergency, but as a normal mode of education into the future. And the idea of if education is broken, tech can fix it. So this would be, I think, is a very intelligent comment, observation on what is happening. In other words, this is not a new development. It's just this development is happening more quickly because of the pandemic. And likewise, if you won't be surprised, I suppose, by this quote from Scott, but again, he is also critiquing the use of the new normal as a pretext. And he says to get rid of physical classrooms, to de-skill teachers, and to impose more and more online teaching. And I think he's very right when he says that language use takes place in physical, social, and bodily spaces. The learning of language should take place there too. Not, of course, to underestimate what we've all been doing remotely. And we have learned a lot of new things, and a lot of positive things have come out of it. But I do think that there is a great deal of truth in this statement and in the previous one from Ben Williamson. So just to conclude then, what now? Where do we go from here? Is there going to be a great reset? I would like to think that we should, as I said, I would like to think that it's better not to think in these terms of sudden cataclysmic changes. I think we need to look at context. I think there will be changes, but these will be context dependent. So I think from talking to a number of teachers that in corporate training, in adult classes, higher education contexts, the remote model is more likely to stick. If you're living in Sao Paulo, like so many people connecting from Sao Paulo now or Buenos Aires, and you have your English class on the other side of the city and you've got to drive through the traffic, you might think, well, actually, I'm going to stick with the remote model because, I'm going to save a lot of time. Some private language schools will undoubtedly suffer as a result of what's happened, and will have to offer cheaper remote classes to survive. Freelance teachers may teach much more but travel less, and I think this is the case especially in big cities. But where is the saturation point for these teachers? I think that's also important to bear in mind. How many hours of remote classes can you do in front of the screen? There is a saturation point. What will, I think, despite the very positive feedback from Lucy and others, that from the young learners, I do think that obviously that will change the least, because for many reasons that young learners need to go back to school faster than others, and clearly there are other reasons why they are at school, to give parents the possibility to work and so on. But I think there will be greater contact with parents, and there will be a stronger link between curricular and extracurricular work. Project work is something that Lucy mentioned in her feedback. And in terms of general changes, I think a greater awareness of the environment will the whole idea of teaching outside is a very interesting something which is emerging because of COVID. And I think that could be something very positive in the future, if the weather permitting. A greater awareness of the environment in which we teach is important, and taking students outside the classroom is a very positive thing if that's logistically possible. Some things will undoubtedly go remote: staff meetings, homework, some forms of assessment. These things have, because of the pandemic, people have realized these are much more easily achievable in a remote context. So this will definitely change. And on a positive level as well, social and emotional learning will impact more across the board as a result of what we've been going through over the last few months and what we're still going through, clearly. And EdTech's role, as I've just mentioned in general education, will grow even at a faster rate. So like many changes, I don't think this is anything new, but the pace with which these changes are going to take place is the new thing. These trends were already prevalent before the pandemic, but they're now becoming increasingly more influential because of the pandemic. And one final quotation, and I'll finish and get some questions from you. This is Paulo Dantas from the Troika Educational. They're a consulting group in Sao Paulo with a particular interest in education technology and language education. I said, what do you think is going to happen, Paulo? And he says, I think many teachers, have realized the positive impact learning technologies might have in their teaching practice. There'll be many inequalities will still persist, but many teachers might resist the change, but I'd expect to see a certain degree of further openness to learning technologies. He says, though, to conclude, all in all, I wouldn't expect a revolution in the near future, but we might see some positive change in the long run. I'm referring there to the use of learning technologies. So, out of breath, but my four final points then would be to conclude. We've acquired so many skills. We've focused on these in the last 50 minutes. Some very positive things have emerged. Don't lose those skills that you've acquired during the pandemic. Remember, I would say that the essentials of good teaching stay the same, whatever the context. Attitude is important, as we saw in those teacher testimonies. But as we also saw from the testimonies, good teaching practice remains very similar, regardless of the context. And keep teachers and students' well-being at the forefront of what you do. And I think at the moment, we're all very concerned with this. And I think that's something very positive to take forward to the future when we do return to face-to-face. So I think that's an excellent, really positive element. And finally, changes will come. It's undoubtedly true, but I don't think we're looking at a great reset. I don't think it will be a revolution, as some people would like us to think it will. So thank you very much for listening. I now have 10 minutes, I think, now I can see your comments. So any questions, please?
Yeah, there are a lot of questions, Ben. Thank you very much for your webinar. We have more than 12,000 members of the EOT community watching your webinar, and they are crazy about that. It generated a lot of conversation. But before that, we're going to see, before we ask the questions they already made to you, I'd like to share with you and with them a quick video about the new series Ben has co-authored with many different great authors from Cambridge University Press, the Evolve series.
Yeah.
Evolve is an American English integrated skills course for adults that puts speaking at the heart of the lesson. We know that students measure their progress in English by their ability to speak spontaneously in real-life situations.
Can I have a cappuccino?
Sure, would you like anything else with it?
Try the coffee cake. It's delicious.
Oh, thanks.
Evolve includes a dedicated time to speak lesson at the end of each unit, helping you to create a safe speaking environment to build confidence and fluency. Whatever your students' reasons are for learning English, with Evolve, you can help them develop the skills they need so they can communicate with confidence. Evolve, because speaking matters.
And now we're back for our questions, Ben. Thank you very much for waiting. Our first question is from Flávia Paiani, Rio Grande do Sul, Porto Alegre. How can I measure my students' learning in remote classes? Some of them seem to learn more, but I'm not sure about the others because they hardly speak.
It's very difficult. I mean, I think that actually that's one of the things that came up in the feedback from teachers, that it's very hard sometimes to know how much your learners are assimilating, how much they're taking in a remote context. So really, I don't have an easy answer to that. I suppose to get them, if you're having doubts about a particular student or particular students, get them to participate more actively. So not just observing them within the breakout room, but actually get them to, nominate them actively to check understanding in open class, in the whole class. But I actually think that's one of the problems of the remote context, that when you're face-to-face with your learners, you can see who's picking things up. It's something you can physically see. But that is, especially with very big classes, that is a challenge. But I would perhaps just suggest, get them to, if you have a serious doubt, get them to participate in open class. I'm losing my voice.
Yeah, it's the thing for speaking that much. Katrina Barta, how about the return of face-to-face classes, having half the class and keeping virtual classes at the same time? How can we have useful results and avoid repetition on contents of contents?
That's a good question. I mean, I think actually, to be honest, we are actually working on that at the moment. How we can take a coursebook like Evolve and create synchronous classes and asynchronous classes, which don't overlap the material. So they're not looking at the same material, but rather the material is complementary. So that's something that Cambridge is looking at, and myself, I've actually been working on that recently because this is something which is relatively new. So I think there is scope to do that without being repetitive. I think the blended model is going to obviously become more popular.
Our next question comes from Altamira Paracleide Oliveira. What be your top tip for us teachers to prepare ourselves for the return of classes?
Well, I think I'm going to go back to my notes.
I saw you mixing using the paper there.
I still use paper. You see, I still use paper. I think it's important, as I said, to not, the 4 things I think I said at the end, to not lose the skills. I mean, maybe many teachers may think, okay, these skills that I've acquired were only really necessary for this emergency context. And once the emergency is over, let's hope it will be over soon, I don't need to call on those skills anymore. And I think that's the mistake, because I think many of these skills are very, can be extremely useful in face-to-face context as well. As I said, the focus on student well-being and not just delivering content, but actually focusing on your learners as people, as the student, as the whole person is the term. And as I said, I think that remember that the good teaching practice is, as I said it a couple of times already, but I think that is really important, that your teaching mode of delivery has changed, but you are the same teacher with, and we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and we've had to learn and adapt and be flexible, and it's been hard. But the essentials remain the same of good teaching practice. So don't separate the 2 things as being wildly different.
Another question, Diane Borin from Americana, São Paulo. How can we improve rapport with all students in our online classes? Are there any tips to get that, since this is a negative fact mentioned?
Yeah. Well, I think that is the whole issue of the SEL, the focusing on your student well-being. So actually address them, as people and not just as students, is a way to develop rapport, to talk about your own life and what you've been. It obviously depends on the group you have, their age, the number of students you have. But one way to improve and keep rapport is to open up as well yourself, and that will help them open up to talk about the things that are really important, the things that are happening. Because this is such a fraught situation, it's such a difficult situation, that I think that is I think rapport is difficult, can be difficult when teaching, because we're not aware of what our learners are taking in. But I think in terms of the relationship between student and teacher, this is something that can be done through asking them questions about their lives, about how they're coping and so on, and not just focusing on the content.
Thank you very much, Ben. Tamara Sanchez from Mexico asks, what is your opinion about study groups in remote learning, especially for those students who are not very autonomous?
Okay. Well, again, I think it all depends on the profile of the student. It's true that there are, as we saw from the feedback from many teachers, that I think it's a great idea, but I think the teacher needs to make the students aware that they do need to be more independent and more autonomous in these remote contexts. And the teacher then has to kind of give up a little bit of the responsibility, and that's where I think it's very important that the teacher realizes that it's only through giving the learners that independence that they will respond well in these contexts. Some students will be resistant to that, but the teacher needs to kind of take the first step by reneging a little bit of that responsibility, shall we say, giving up some of that responsibility. But yes, yeah, okay.
Pardon me, I interrupt you. Could you please?
That's okay. Let's move on.
Maria Clarfeld, our last question. Their interpersonal intelligence might have suffered during this point that consider should we prioritize its development when we go back to the classroom? How?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. That the obviously the confinement is what the effect is having is that we are very, very looking inwards, and we're really lacking and yearning for that kind of personal social contact. But I think there are ways, as I've said, to approach that in the remote context, so that I don't. I would definitely say that we need to prioritize talking, as I said, about well-being, student well-being, and teacher well-being, and making learners and teachers put them on a similar level. I think that can be done in the remote classroom, and then when we do end up going, hopefully we get back to the face-to-face classroom. That will be a priority already, because we've already discussed it in the remotely. But so I think that interpersonal, it's a good question, because I think the interpersonal is precisely what students are yearning for. That's why the classroom is so important, because that is the kind of contact that they have, which they missed, and therefore I think that's something that really needs to be highlighted, both remotely and then face to face when we go back.
Muito obrigada, muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Ben. Could you give us your final consideration on your webinar, please?
Well, I had a lot of material, so it's a new talk, so to fit everything into 50 minutes. But I hope that really, I wanted to raise awareness of, what's happening, what we've been going through, and what we're still going through, and what we have learned. We've learned an incredible amount, but I think what can we take forward, to when we go back to face, and what are the benefits, without ignoring obviously a lot of the problems. I didn't want this to be purely focusing on the positive side, because clearly that's not the whole story. So I wanted to kind of raise awareness of everything that's been going on, focusing on that, and then seeing where do we go from here, and it'll be really interesting to see people's response. Please, feel free to pass on my details. If anybody wants to get in touch with me, that's absolutely fine. I can't seem to leave my email in the comments, but I'll leave it here with you now, and then perhaps you can
for our team to share it on the comments.
Absolutely, because I wasn't able to see many of the comments as they were coming through. I just gave 2 or 3 tasks to the participants, so I wasn't able to. Oh, that's quick. Thank you.
We are like magicians here, and people are thanking you so much. Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. Very great opportunity to have you here. Thanks for your webinar. Also, I think that probably what you talked answered a lot of the anxiety of the teachers. I think as a society we are struggling with the moment, but we are going to go after that and go beyond that as well.
Bom, muito obrigado a você também por tudo.
Muito obrigada, adorei português.
Fala pouquinho, portunhol.
Thank you very much, Ben, for being with us.
Saudades do Brasil.
We hope to have you here next year, okay? Thank you very much again.
Be back. And
with you guys, the Canvas Day 2020 for me and partner to the day to a social media and institution that has been working since 1993 to combat hunger and poverty in Brazil. Have you donated yet? We already collected 11,000 reais, and I'm sure that together we can reach our next target, which is 50,000 reais. If you live outside Brazil, you can also contribute. Access the link or scan the code to contribute to this initiative. My last advice before we go to the break, I'm talking about initiatives to see a teacher from the Instituto Federal do Bahia, Campo Salvador, invite you all to take part of COMEL, Congresso de Metodologia de Ensino de Línguas. I'm happy to see you, the ELT community. That working already? Again, is that good? I heard that I have a small issue with my microphone. Let me see just if everybody's listening to me. Yes, here I am again with you guys. Let me see. Yes, we're working. Sorry. So I was thanking to Ben, and I was giving my last advices, my last message before our break. First of all, Cambridge Day 2020, promoted by Cambridge University Press Brazil, is asking participants and partners to donate to Ação da Cidadania, an institution that has been working since 1993 against hunger and poverty here in Brazil. Have you donated yet? We already collected 11,000 reais, and I'm sure that together we can reach our next target, which is 15,000 reais. If you live outside Brazil, you can also contribute, access the link or scan the code to contribute to the initiative. For the ones of you who are asking about the certificate, after my speech, the final screen will give you a link and a QR code for you to get a certificate to answer. After answering a survey, you can download and edit a certificate from Ben Goldstein's webinar. We have now a short break, and I will be back with you soon.